The sun burned low over Carthage, gilding the harbor and streets in a harsh amber light. Ships creaked against the stone docks, merchants shouted over the cries of hawkers, and the scent of salt and spices filled the air. Amidst the bustle, a boy stood silently, watching his father stride through the marketplace. His name was Hannibal, and he was only 9 years old. Hannibal Barca had returned from Sicily, bitter, humiliated, and consumed by anger at the growing power of Rome. He knelt before his son, gripping his shoulders with hands hardened by years of battle. "Hannibal," he said, voice low and sharp, "look at this city. Look at the world. Rome has shamed us, defeated us, humiliated Carthage. Do you swear, here and now, that you will dedicate your life to its destruction?" Hannibal's small eyes met his father's, steady and unwavering. "I swear it," he said, a vow that would shape the rest of his life. From that day on, childhood ended for Hannibal. He trained relentlessly, studying strategy, leadership, and the art of war. He learned to read the terrain like a living map, to predict the moves of men, and to manipulate the chaos of battle. Carthage thrived around him, a city of wealth, politics, and intrigue. But Hannibal's gaze always drifted beyond its walls, toward the eternal enemy, Rome. Even in play, he was disciplined. Even in silence, he planned. And every step of his youth was guided by one burning oath, one promise that would echo across generations: the destruction of Rome. Years passed, and Hannibal grew into a young man with the lean, coiled strength of a predator. By the time he was in his early 20s, he'd already made a name for himself in the Iberian Peninsula, where Carthage's empire clashed with local tribes. Step by step, he carved out territories not through brute force alone, but with cunning, precision, and charisma. He forged alliances, subdued hostile tribes, and turned mercenaries into loyal soldiers through discipline and respect. Hannibal's army became a reflection of his mind, adaptable, disciplined, and unpredictable. Heavy infantry with long spears formed impenetrable walls. Cavalry struck from unexpected angles. Elephants, towering and terrifying, trained for the chaos of battle. Every soldier understood their place, their role, and the importance of their mission. Hannibal's reputation spread quickly, carried by whispers, rumors, and terrified soldiers who had faced him in skirmishes. Rome, ever watchful, began to hear his name with a mixture of fear and fascination. But the young general's brilliance was not confined to the battlefield. Carthage was a city of treacherous politics, where councils debated endlessly, factions schemed, and loyalty was fragile. Hannibal navigated this web with the same care he used on a battlefield, understanding that an army, no matter how mighty, was nothing without the support of the city's power brokers. Step by step, he learned patience, subtlety, and the art of persuasion. And yet, behind every move, every strategy, lingered the oath. Hannibal did not fight merely for conquest or glory. He fought for revenge, for the promise he had made to his father so many years ago. Each victory, each tactical maneuver was a step toward Rome, a preparation for the moment when the city that had humiliated Carthage would feel the full force of his wrath. As he trained his men, mapped his territories, and built alliances, Hannibal's mind constantly measured risks, calculated probabilities, and imagined every possible outcome. He became more than a general. He became a strategist in the truest sense, someone who saw the battlefield as a living organism and the war as a series of intricate moves in a grand, unending game. By the time he turned 25, Hannibal Barca was ready. Ready not only to command men, but to defy history itself. Ready to march on Rome, step by step across lands that would test his army, his ingenuity, and his endurance. The stage was set. The world would soon see the first moves of a master whose name would be whispered in fear for centuries. The march toward Italy began quietly, almost imperceptibly, as Hannibal led his army out of Spain. The terrain itself was a constant adversary, winding paths, sudden cliffs, and rivers swollen from rain. Thousands of men, cavalry, and elephants needed to move in unison, each step calculated, each decision weighed against the lives depending on it. Crossing the Pyrenees was a nightmare that would test even Hannibal's legendary patience. Soldiers stumbled over jagged rocks, boots soaked in icy streams, and the elephants, massive, unwieldy beasts, slipped and fell into ravines. Hannibal moved among them constantly, checking maps, adjusting formations, and offering words of calm encouragement. He knew that discipline and morale could win more battles than brute force alone. When they reached the Rhone, a new challenge awaited. A wide, turbulent river patrolled by Roman scouts. Hannibal's solution was methodical. He ordered rafts and makeshift pontoons, directing men to cross in carefully timed groups. Elephants, reluctant and terrified, were coaxed by trainers who whispered commands and guided them with ropes and food. Step by step, the army crossed, emerging on the northern bank without a single disaster that could have crippled their campaign. Every village they passed whispered of their approach. Farmers fled. Local tribes debated whether to resist or surrender. And Roman scouts reported strange rumors. A general with elephants moving through the mountains, unstoppable and inexorable. Hannibal's army became a force of myth, each crossing, each skirmish amplifying the legend of the man who dared to challenge Rome on its doorstep. Yet Hannibal's genius was never in recklessness. Each move was measured, each challenge met with strategy. He knew that Rome was waiting, that every river, every mountain, every narrow pass could turn a victory into disaster. And he prepared his men accordingly, making sure that their first encounter with Italy would not only be a clash of armies, but a demonstration of his meticulous command. By the time the army descended into the valleys of northern Italy, fatigue had thinned their numbers, but determination had hardened them into a weapon of extraordinary precision. Hannibal's vision was clear. Rome would be forced to respond, and when they did, the stage would be set for a campaign that would echo through history. Every step across the Pyrenees and Rhone was a step closer to destiny, a testament to strategy, leadership, and the unbreakable will of one man bound by an oath. The Alps rose before Hannibal's army like a wall of stone and ice, indifferent to men, animals, or ambition. Jagged peaks tore at the sky, clouds clinging like ghosts, wind whipping down from heights where no life should endure. For months, Hannibal had planned this journey meticulously, yet standing at the base of the mountains, even he felt the weight of impossibility. Snow blanketed the slopes, turning paths into treacherous slides. Rocks loosened underfoot, avalanches thundered without warning, and the cold gnawed through leather, cloth, and flesh. Soldiers shivered in formation, elephants stamping impatiently, trunks frozen and eyes wide with terror. Each step forward was a battle against nature itself. Hannibal, cloaked in furs, moved among his men, his eyes scanning the treacherous terrain. He directed, encouraged, and sometimes punished those who faltered, knowing that discipline could mean the difference between life and death.
Supply lines stretched thin, food ran low, and morale teetered on the edge of despair. Yet he never lost focus. Every valley crossed, every ridge scaled was a step closer to Rome, and every obstacle overcome became part of the legend he was forging. Winter storms raged without mercy. Tents were torn, fires extinguished, and men froze where they had fallen. Elephants, untested in snow and ice, balked at every slope, forcing Hannibal's engineers to build makeshift roads and ramps from timber and stone. Corpses of animals and men alike were carried away, the scent of frostbitten death lingering in the air. Yet the army endured. They learned to anticipate the avalanches, to ration food with precision, and to navigate by memory, maps, and the stars. Hannibal pushed forward relentlessly, understanding that hesitation meant failure. Every peril faced in the Alps was a lesson, every loss a sacrifice to the greater goal. After weeks of climbing, descending, and fighting against the mountain itself, Hannibal's army emerged on the southern slopes, battered, diminished, but alive. The Alps had claimed lives, but not spirit. Each man who stepped into the Italian valleys below had been tested, refined, and transformed. The army that now looked upon the fertile plains of northern Italy was no longer a collection of soldiers. It was a force forged in snow, ice, and unyielding resolve. Hannibal's legend grew not only from victories, but from the audacity to challenge nature itself. The plains of northern Italy stretched out before Hannibal like a new world. Green fields, rivers glinting in sunlight, and forests whispering with the wind replaced the frozen desolation of the Alps. Yet the army did not rejoice. They had survived one trial only to face another. Rome lay ahead, and the shadow of its legions stretched like a storm on the horizon. Hannibal's eyes swept across the land, memorizing every hill, river, and forest edge. Every town could hide an ambush, every road could funnel troops into a trap. His mind, always several moves ahead, calculated marches, supply routes, and the best places to strike. The army, though weary, trusted him utterly. Each man knew that their survival and glory depended on the strategy of this single, unrelenting commander. Small skirmishes began almost immediately. Roman patrols and allied forces tried to test Hannibal, probing the limits of his army. Yet every encounter became a lesson in tactical brilliance. Cavalry charged, then vanished into the woods. Infantry advanced under a hail of missiles, and then withdrew as if controlled by an unseen hand. Elephants, immense and terrifying, became living siege engines, their presence alone scattering Roman formations. The countryside of northern Italy was not passive. Roads turned to mud, rivers swelled, and the enemy adapted quickly. Hannibal adapted faster. He divided his forces, sent detachments to raid supply lines, and used deception to confuse the enemy. Roman commanders, disciplined and rigid, struggled against his fluid tactics. Every move was psychological warfare, bending the enemy's expectations, forcing mistakes, and exploiting fear. By the time the army reached the Po Valley, Hannibal had already established a reputation among Romans and allies alike. Rumors spread of his genius, of his elephants, and of an unbreakable resolve that had carried him across mountains that should have stopped him forever. Villages opened their gates to him, either out of fear or admiration, and the first seeds of rebellion against Rome took root in the hearts of allies he courted with careful diplomacy. The Italian campaign had begun, and the landscape itself had become a stage for Hannibal's audacity. Rivers, hills, and forests were no longer merely geography. They were instruments of strategy. Hannibal's army, tempered by the Alps, now moved like a predator across the plains. Rome had yet to realize the storm coming to its doorstep, a storm that would not only test its armies, but shake the very foundations of the Republic itself.
The heat of summer pressed down on the Campanian plains. Dust swirled around Roman standards, and the air smelled of sweat, leather, and tension. Hannibal's army had grown stronger, more coordinated, and now faced the greatest challenge yet, the full might of Rome, assembled in disciplined legions and confident in their numbers. The battlefield stretched endlessly. On one side, Rome bristled with men, shields reflecting sunlight and standards snapping in the wind. On the other, Hannibal surveyed his forces, cavalry poised at the flanks, infantry in precise formations, and elephants positioned to strike fear into any who faltered. He did not rush. He waited, measuring the enemy, calculating the moment to strike. As the Romans advanced confident in their superior numbers, Hannibal's infantry began a subtle withdrawal in the center, bending but not breaking, forming a crescent that seemed to invite the enemy in. The Romans pressed, certain they would crush the smaller Carthaginian force. And then, at the precise moment, Hannibal's flank struck with ferocious speed. Cavalry surged from the sides, encircling the Roman legions. The crescent closed like a trap. Chaos erupted. Roman soldiers, trained and disciplined, found themselves surrounded. Commands shouted over the roar of combat were drowned by screams, steel clashing, and the deafening cries of elephants charging into their ranks. Hannibal moved through the battlefield, observing, directing, always 3 steps ahead. Every maneuver had been anticipated, every trap meticulously planned. By nightfall, the battlefield was littered with the fallen. Rome had suffered one of the greatest defeats in its history. Estimates of casualties reached tens of thousands, men killed, wounded, or captured. Hannibal had not only won, he had demonstrated the terrifying potential of strategy, patience, and audacity combined. Yet victory was bittersweet. Hannibal knew Rome was far from defeated. The Republic had resources, resilience, and a capacity for adaptation that could outlast even his genius. Cannae was a pinnacle, yes, but it was also a warning. Rome would rise again, and the war, relentless and unyielding, was only beginning. The soldiers of Carthage celebrated, exhausted but alive. The elephants fed and tended, and Hannibal remained vigilant. The land was silent in the aftermath, broken only by the cries of survivors and the wind across the plains. He understood the cost of victory, how fleeting it could be, and yet he could not stop. Rome had been struck, but the ultimate prize remained beyond reach.
Years of campaign, thousands of miles crossed, countless battles fought, had brought Hannibal to the edge of exhaustion. Italy stretched before him, a land that had seen his triumphs and his genius. Yet Rome endured, rebuilt, and adapted. Supplies ran low, allies abandoned him, and reinforcements never arrived from Carthage. The grand vision of total victory slipped like sand through his fingers. Hannibal's army, once vast and awe-inspiring, thinned under disease, desertion, and the endless demands of war. The elephants, now few in number, no longer inspired fear. They were symbols of the journey's relentless toll. Each day became a careful calculation, each battle a gamble. The glory of Cannae was now a memory, a shining peak overshadowed by the relentless march of time and the unyielding spirit of Rome. Eventually, Hannibal withdrew, a commander undefeated in battle, yet defeated by circumstance. He had reshaped Italy, terrified a republic, and carved a name into history. But the war he had sworn to win could not be completed. Rome remained, defiant and unbroken. Still, Hannibal's legend endured. Across generations, the name of the general who dared to cross mountains, rivers, and empires would be spoken with awe, fear, and respect. His oath, his brilliance, and his relentless will became immortal, not through the fall of Rome, but through the story of a man who challenged the mightiest power of his time, step by step, against all odds, and changed history forever.